Hello, this is Ron Binz. I'd like to talk about how adding more wind power to a utility's generation fleet can actually reduce costs to the utility and to consumers. But first things first, I have a consulting practice called Public Policy Consulting and a website. You can go to that website and see this presentation plus other materials that I've produced. Well, you know about the scales of justice. How about the scales of utility costs? We're going to use this to compare a couple portfolios. In the right-hand side, we're going to put a natural gas plant. That's a brand new, highly efficient combined cycle natural gas plant. On the left-hand side, we're going to put the very same natural gas plant, but now we're going to add a wind farm. Now let's turn the scales loose and see what happens. If you're like most people, you're saying, what's going on here? How can a gas plant plus a wind farm actually cost less than a gas plant alone? Let's look at an analysis that shows how this is true. But before we do that, let's see what the takeaways of this analysis are. It turns out that a wind farm plus a gas plant can cost less than a gas plant alone, can lower utility revenue requirements, and lower rates to customers. The analysis that I'm going to show you doesn't even count avoided emissions of carbon dioxide, doesn't even count the value of wind as a hedge on natural gas prices, and doesn't take into consideration the economic development impacts of building wind farms in communities. You're probably saying, Ron, how can this be? Well, I'm going to show you a study that demonstrates this conclusively. This is a spreadsheet produced by Xcel Energy in Colorado in 2013 that looks at the costs of various expansions of their portfolio. Notice it's a highly confidential document, but don't worry, we have the public version of it. Let me show you what the elements of this spreadsheet are. First, across the top is an identifier for the portfolio number. So there's 1, 2, 3, out to 25 different portfolios are studied. Each portfolio is analyzed with respect to its costs. That's known as the present value of revenue requirements, stated in millions of dollars. So for example, portfolio number 1 has a net present value cost of $33 billion over the study period. The spreadsheet also ranks the portfolios with respect to their cost. That's the line above the cost. You'll see that portfolio number 1 is the 14th most expensive. Later we'll be looking at portfolios which are less costly. The portfolios are analyzed with respect to low gas price sensitivity, high gas price sensitivity, and an assumption about the price of carbon. Here the sensitivity studied is $20 per ton of CO2. Now let's go back to the spreadsheet and look at what the basis for this analysis in this case is. You'll see that this one uses a base gas forecast. In other words, the utility's best estimate of the future price of natural gas. And it assumes a cost of carbon of $0 per ton. That's a very conservative estimate. Now there's a lot of portfolios here. We don't need to look at all of them. I'm going to select portfolios 1, 7, 16, and 18. Here they are, all put together in one place so we can analyze them. We begin by looking at portfolio 1 and 7. You'll see that Portfolio 1 has 747 megawatts of gas, so does Portfolio 7. But Portfolio 7 has 199 megawatts of wind added to that. If you look at the PVRR, you'll see that Portfolio 7 is actually cheaper than Portfolio 1 by $129 million. That improves the ranking of Portfolio 1 up from 14th position up to 9th position. You will also see that the amount of carbon dioxide emitted in Portfolio 7 is less than that in Portfolio 1. Let's look at the next case. Portfolio 7 versus 16. Portfolio 7 has less natural gas by a slight amount, much more wind, and solar. So there's 170 megawatts of solar added to Portfolio 16, up from 0. The amount of wind is up 250 megawatts, and the amount of gas is decreased. Once again, we see that moving from 7 to 16 lowers the ranking from 9th to 4th cheapest, and the PVRR is lowered again, so that now with Portfolio 16 we're $261 million cheaper than that first case that we looked at, base gas case. And as you might expect, the amount of carbon dioxide emitted in Portfolio 16 is less than Portfolio 7. Now, just so that you have some sense of what's going on here, when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, those two resources displace the fuel, the natural gas that's used in the generation in that gas plant that was added. So that's how these pieces fit together. Now finally we look at Portfolio 16 and 18. If you look at the top, you'll see that 16 is the preferred utilities portfolio and 18 is the least cost of all the ones studied. Once again, moving even more wind into the portfolio and more solar lowers the cost from $32,766 to $32,735. That means that compared to the original base case, the highest addition of wind, 540 megawatts, plus 220 megawatts of solar, produces a revenue requirement that's cheaper by $292 million on a net present value from our first case. The delta on CO2 emissions that's the lowest case in portfolio number 18. So going back to our picture of the utility cost scale, you'll see that this is actually true. Again, if you understand what's happening, the wind farm produces energy cheaper than the cost of natural gas, so that when it displaces natural gas in a gas plant, you actually save money on the portfolio, even though you have made additional capital investments. So conclusions that I draw from all of this is the future for U.S. wind power is very good. Wind costs will continue to decline as other resource costs rise. Wind fits in very well, as we just demonstrated with gas generation, as a fuel-saving measure. You all know that the EPA is going to come out with its 111D air pollution rules for existing power plants. That'll be an important driver for more wind. And the fact that storage is coming to the grid is a great enabler of more renewables, including both wind and solar. I want to stress that the analysis that you saw here, done by Xcel Energy, is a pretty robust integrated resource planning analysis. That's the kind of analysis that has to be done if we're going to make the right choices. And the concept of risk-aware regulation means that you look at a broad set of portfolios to choose the one which is not only least cost, but because of the fact that wind will diversify the portfolio, is also lower risk. And finally, the cost of wind right now is low enough in many states that utilities are adding wind even when they're not being told they must by a state RPS. In other words, the state RPS rules will become moot in some states. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to your questions.